Welcome, brave souls, to DrConjuring, a place where the dead still whisper and horror stories come to life. Before we begin, the spirits have a question. How far do our tales travel? Tell us in the comments, because something is always listening. If you crave more darkness, more horror stories that linger long after the lights go out, please like this video and subscribe. Your support feeds the shadows, helping us create even more terrifying stories. We truly do appreciate it, and so do they. Now, let's begin. But be warned, some stories never let go. This is the story of one of the most horrifying cave death incidents ever told, a tale of desperation, fear, and the unrelenting grip of the underground. Before we begin, viewer discretion is advised. This story involves themes of claustrophobia, tragedy, and loss, which may be deeply unsettling for some. On November 24, 2009, a group of friends and family gathered for what was supposed to be a fun pre-Thanksgiving caving trip in Nutty Putty Cave, Utah. For John Edward Jones and his brother Josh, it was more than just an adventure. It was a chance to reconnect before the holiday season. But what started as an exciting exploration would quickly turn into a nightmare that still haunts those who were involved. John, 26 years old at the time, was an experienced caver with a passion for underground adventures. Growing up, he had spent many hours exploring caves with his father and brother. Now, as an adult, he was back in Utah visiting his family, but things had changed. No longer the slim teenager, John was now a 200-pound, 6'1" man. He was still excited for the challenge, but he hadn't anticipated the dangers that lay ahead. It was around 8 p.m. when the group entered the cave. After exploring the big slide and other areas, John, Josh, and two friends decided to push their limits further by seeking a more challenging route. They had a map, but the underground world is vast and treacherous, filled with tight spaces that demand caution. The air was thick with moisture, carrying the earthy, almost metallic scent of damp rock. The deeper they ventured, the more the temperature dropped, sending a persistent chill through their bodies. Their breath came out in faint wisps, barely visible in the dim glow of their headlamps. Shadows stretched and twisted along the jagged walls, flickering with each movement, giving the illusion that something unseen was shifting in the darkness. To reach the passage they sought, they had to crawl, pressing their bodies against the cold, unforgiving stone. The tunnel narrowed around them, forcing them onto their stomachs as they dragged themselves forward. Their clothing scraped against the rough, uneven surface, and every movement sent tiny echoes bouncing through the cavern, creating an eerie sense that they were not alone. The silence was unsettling. The only sounds were their own labored breathing, the faint drip of water from the ceiling, and the occasional crunch of loose rock beneath their weight. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the cave itself was swallowing them whole. And then, in the distance, John's light caught a glimpse of it, the tightest, most claustrophobic passage yet. A narrow, winding crevice barely wide enough for a human body to squeeze through. John set his sights on a formation known as the birth canal, a narrow passage that required careful navigation to avoid becoming stuck. John's gloved hands brushed against the damp rock as he inched forward, his breath slow and controlled. He had found what he believed was the birth canal, a passage notorious for its tight squeeze, but in reality he had unknowingly entered a different section of the cave. This was Ed's Push, an even more unforgiving tunnel, and he was about to realize just how deadly a mistake he had made. The walls closed in around him as he advanced head first, his helmet scraping against the jagged limestone above. The narrow passage forced his arms to remain stretched in front of him, and with each movement the rock seemed to grip him tighter, as if the cave itself were resisting his presence. The air was stifling now, thick with the stale scent of wet earth and minerals. It was silent, oppressively so, except for the sound of his own breath, which had grown shallow and uneven. As he crawled further, he noticed the tunnel was getting even narrower. At first he ignored it, shifting his body slightly to fit through. He had been in tight spaces before. This was just another squeeze. But then a sickening realization settled in. The walls weren't just close. They were pressing against him, compressing his chest, his arms. His helmet was starting to wedge against the ceiling, making it harder to move his head. He exhaled sharply, trying to shrink himself just enough to slide forward or backward, but the moment he sucked in another breath, his chest expanded again, and suddenly he couldn't move. The cold, unyielding rock wrapped around him like a coffin, and panic began to creep in. He tried to shift his weight, but there was nowhere to go. His legs were stretched behind him in the only open space left, but his torso was completely lodged in the crevice. His fingers scrambled against the stone, searching for any kind of leverage, but it was useless. The rock held him in place like a predator that had finally trapped its prey. The silence was deafening. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, and for the first time, the thought hit him like a sledgehammer. I might not get out of here. Josh had been following close behind, moving cautiously through the suffocating passageways, his breath coming in short, careful bursts. The cave was a labyrinth of twisting tunnels, its walls slick with moisture, and the scent of damp earth thick in the air. The deeper they went, the more the darkness felt alive, pressing in, swallowing sound, making the space feel even smaller than it was. At first, Josh had heard nothing but the occasional scuff of John's boots against the rock, and his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. But then, something changed. A muffled grunt, a pause, a sharp, panicked exhale. "John?" Josh called, his voice bouncing off the cold limestone. No answer. Just silence. The kind of silence that felt wrong. Josh crawled forward, feeling the rock close in around him, the air growing stale and thick, and then he heard it, labored breathing, fast and erratic, like someone struggling to keep control. "I'm stuck," John's voice finally came, strained and tight. I can't move." Josh's stomach knotted. He shuffled forward as fast as the narrow tunnel would allow, the jagged edges scraping his elbows and knees. His headlamp flickered, casting eerie shadows along the cave walls. Then, finally, he saw him. John's body was jammed deep in the passage, his torso twisted in an unnatural position. His helmet was pushed awkwardly against the rock, his face barely visible. He had gone in head first, and the passage had swallowed him whole. The only part of him still free were his lower legs, kicking feebly, struggling for any kind of leverage. Josh reached out, grabbing at his brother's ankle, but there was no way to pull him back. John had slid even further, wedging himself tighter with every breath. His chest was heaving now, his voice laced with raw fear. "It's getting tighter," John gasped. I can't breathe right." Josh felt ice crawl up his spine. The passage was supposed to have an opening at the end, but what if it didn't? What if this was just a dead-end squeeze? Okay, hold on," Josh said, trying to keep his voice steady. But his hands were shaking. He felt utterly helpless. John let out a sudden, desperate grunt, trying to shift his body again. A horrible sound followed, the scraping of bone against rock. Then, a sickening realization. John's arms had been pinned beneath his chest, completely immobilizing him. Josh's breath hitched. His brother was now trapped in the worst possible way, head down, upside down, unable to move his arms or expand his chest properly. Panic surged in his throat, but he forced it down. "I'm gonna get help," he said, his voice cracking. Just hold on, okay?" John didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't leave me, man." Josh hesitated, guilt gnawing at him, but he knew he had no choice. "I'm coming right back," he promised. Then, with his heart hammering in his chest, he turned and began the agonizing crawl back through the suffocating tunnels. Every second felt like an eternity, his pulse roaring in his ears. As he neared the larger opening of the cave, he fumbled for his phone with shaking hands, his fingers numb with terror. He barely registered the cold as he finally broke through to the surface, gasping for breath. His vision swam as he hit the emergency dial. 911, what's your emergency? My brother, he's trapped. He's trapped in the cave. He can't move. He can't breathe. The words tumbled out in a frantic rush. But all he could think about was John, alone in the pitch-black depths, crushed by the earth itself. And with every passing second, the cave was claiming him just a little bit more. Susie Matola knew this rescue would be unlike anything she had faced before. When the call came in, she barely had time to process what she was about to do, only that a man was trapped, deep underground, and every second counted. The entrance to Nutty Putty Cave was unassuming, just a gaping hole in the earth leading into an abyss of winding tunnels and deathly tight squeezes. The rescuers had no choice but to move fast. But in a place like this, speed was a luxury no one could afford. Susie took a deep breath and began her descent, crawling through the jagged, damp rock tunnels. The deeper she went, the more the darkness consumed her. The cave smelled of wet stone and something else, something more organic, the kind of scent that clung to the air when people had been stuck somewhere for too long. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she forced herself forward, her body contorting to fit through passageways barely wide enough for a child. The walls pressed in from all sides. The silence was oppressive. The only sounds were her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, and the occasional distant drip of water echoing through the cavern like a ghostly whisper. The cave had an eerie way of swallowing sound, making everything feel more isolated, more hopeless. As she crawled, the rock scraped against her arms and legs, leaving shallow cuts. The cold air bit at her skin, seeping through her clothes like an unwelcome presence. The tunnels twisted and turned, growing smaller, squeezing tighter. She had been in tight caves before, but this was different. This place was a tomb. After what felt like an eternity, she reached the final stretch. The space before her narrowed into an almost impossible passage, the one John had forced himself into, mistaking it for the birth canal. Susie took a moment to steady herself, then inched forward, her heart hammering in her chest. Then she saw him. John's body was twisted unnaturally in the unforgiving rock, his frame barely visible in the dim glow of her headlamp. And just beyond him, wedged in a precarious spot, was Josh, his brother, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. Josh had refused to leave. After scrambling back to the entrance to call 911, he had done the only thing he could. He had come back. He had crawled, squeezed, and twisted his body through the nightmare passages, retracing the agonizing route that led to his brother's grave. "Josh," Susie breathed, startled to find him there. He was hunched over awkwardly in a space barely large enough to turn his head. His breath came in short, sharp gasps, his body trembling from exhaustion and sheer terror. He had tried everything, pulling at John's legs, yelling for him to hold on, even attempting to wedge himself beneath him to give him some kind of leverage. But nothing worked. Josh looked up at Susie, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, his voice hoarse from screaming. He's not okay," he choked out. "He keeps fading in and out. He stopped answering me for a while." Susie moved closer, her heart sinking as she took in John's ghastly position. He was nearly upside down, the weight of his own body pressing mercilessly against him, Blood pooled in his head, his face swollen, skin tinged with a sickly pallor. "John!" she called gently, reaching out to touch his leg. It was cold. For a horrifying moment there was no response. Then a slow, weak murmur. "Hey!" "Still here." Josh let out a shaky breath, his hands gripping the jagged walls so hard his knuckles were white. "We have to get him out. We have to do something." But Susie knew this wasn't going to be simple. This wasn't a matter of pulling him free. The cave had swallowed him whole, and the earth was closing in. This was a race against time, and they were already losing. The damp, suffocating air of Nutty Putty Cave clung to John Jones like a second skin. His voice, shaky but firm, echoed through the narrow tunnel. "Hi, Susie. Things are coming, but I really, really want to get out." His words were laced with desperation. Trapped nearly upside down, his 6-foot, 200-pound body was being swallowed whole by the unyielding rock above him. His world had shrunk to a suffocating blackness, the rough stone pressing against his ribs with every shallow breath he took. Susie, her slight frame wedged into the crevice beside him, struggled to maneuver. She had been in tight spaces before. This was different. John had been stuck for over 3 hours, his arms twisted in an unnatural contortion, one bent beneath his chest, the other pinned backward, useless. His legs dangled freely, but they might as well have been dead weight. Susie tied a webbed rope around his ankles, hoping to leverage him out. It felt like trying to swim against a riptide of solid rock. She lowered a water bottle, tipping it forward so the liquid could snake down his arm, praying it would reach his lips. The rescue team above struggled to pull, but the rope groaned against the rough stone, friction winning the battle. Time stretched. Minutes turned into hours. More than 100 rescue personnel swarmed the cave's mouth, their voices a muffled buzz in the distance. Outside, the command center crackled with urgent voices and frantic strategies. The clock was ticking. John's body, hanging at a brutal downward angle, was betraying him. Gravity had become his executioner, forcing his heart to pump desperately against the unnatural pull of his own weight. Blood pooled in his head, his pulse hammering in his skull. They tried everything. Pulleys drilled into fragile calcite crumbled under the strain. The rope system failed. Cooking oil was considered, explosives briefly discussed, then dismissed. The stone was winning. The cave did not want to let him go. Ryan Schertz, a rescuer, crawled into the tunnel to be with John. He loosened the knot around John's legs, whispering reassurances in the suffocating dark. He pressed a Gatorade pouch to John's mouth, felt his fingers twitch as he tried to hold on, but John was slipping. After 19 agonizing hours, they tried again. The pulleys groaned, the rope strained, and John moved. Inch by inch he rose. Then a snap, a sickening crack of stone giving way. The weight recoiled, and a metal carabiner shot loose, slamming into Ryan's face with bone-shattering force. Blood filled his mouth, his tongue nearly severed. Above, rescuers tumbled backward, crashing into the dirt as the rope went slack. John's body jerked violently before settling back into the suffocating embrace of the cave. Ryan, barely conscious, could do nothing but listen to the wet, ragged breaths coming from the darkness below. He wasn't sure which of them was dying faster. Desperation turned to inevitability. John's body had endured too much, gravity squeezing the life from him like a cruel, invisible hand. His heartbeat faltered. Then, at 11:56 p.m. on November 25, 2009, it stopped. Silence claimed the cave. Rescuers, battered and exhausted, stared at each other, realization sinking in like ice through their veins. John Jones would never leave Nutty Putty Cave. The effort to remove his body was deemed impossible. The cave had swallowed him whole, and it would keep him. Concrete was poured at the entrance, sealing his tomb forever. The cave where John Jones fought, begged, and hoped for rescue had finally claimed him, and it would never let go. That was tonight's chilling tale from DrConjuring's channel. If it sent shivers down your spine, please give us a like. It's completely free and helps us share these eerie stories with more brave souls like you. And if you're craving even more bone-chilling horror that will haunt your nights, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You'll never miss a new upload, each story more terrifying than the last, delivered straight to your inbox. Thank you so much for listening. We truly appreciate every one of you. Good night. And remember, sleep with one eye open. You never know what might be watching. Ha ha.